Hello once again, and welcome to Season 4 of Behind the Grind series as we take a look at the journey of some of our favorite fantasy football analysts, members of the sports media, and of course, athletes. This week, we are going behind the grind with fellow Canadian, a former St. Mary's Husky alumni, an award-winning video host and producer. He is an experience unlike any other when it comes to fantasy sports and handicapping. He is the one and only Pat Mayo, not to be confused with the bounty hunter, Patty Mayo. How you doing, Pat?
There's the bounty hunter, and there's also a photojournalist in Milwaukee who takes like ABC Viz for the Packers, who's also named Pat Mayo. So there's three of us.
Well, so if you were in a room with the three, who do you think you'd have the better conversation with? Like the photographer or the bounty hunter?
Probably I've talked to the photographer because he had at Pat Mayo when I signed up for Twitter in like 2009. So we've been like in contact for the past 15 years.
Just try to get that Pat Mayo at Pat Mayo back to you rather than the PME.
Well, not so much anymore. Back when, do you remember when Twitter used to take up characters for handles?
Yep.
Yeah. So like then that's why it's so short for mine. It used to be very long and then I had to truncate it down. So I always thought that having at Pat Mayo would be perfect, but the PME worked out much better, I think.
Yeah, I think Matt Donnelly, at Matt Donnelly, I don't think he's even tweeted in the last 10 years, but he's still got the handle there. So we got to do what any fantasy football analyst is or member of the media is at FF or at NFL or something just to kind of go with it. Originally, it was Dingus4, which made no sense to a whole lot of people. So we've kind of graduated from that. Now, speaking of graduation, we all had graduating songs. In high school, remember that whole thing, right? You all had that weird graduation song. I can't even remember what mine was nowadays, but I'm pretty sure it was Our Lady Peace. But we're going to forget about that whole high school experience. We're going to look at if you were coming to the ring or if you were coming in to close out a game in the bottom of the ninth inning, what would the Pat Mayo experience theme song be entering the game?
Oh, boy. Trying to come in, it had to be something with a heavy riff off the top, almost like a wrestling intro. So it's not a great song and not a great remaster, but I think like Steve Carino used to come out to this in ECW. And it was from the Godzilla soundtrack. It was a Led Zeppelin song. It was Jimmy Page with, I can't remember who, it was Puff Daddy singing it. It was called Come With Me, and the song is actually quite terrible, but like the first 15 seconds really do rock, just the riff from that Led Zeppelin part. So that would probably be it.
I think Puff Daddy was 90% of the Godzilla soundtrack that year, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that's that song, but we all have, you're a father. You've heard about 100 songs probably every day. Is there a guilty pleasure song that you have? Is it maybe like Baby Shark or something Miss Rachel sings, like Icky Sticky Bubble Gum, or is any of those things? What's that guilty pleasure song for you?
There's a couple of Wiggle songs that aren't actually all that bad.
It is surprising. They kind of catch you and they stick in your head and they're permanently burnt in there moving forward, aren't they?
They are. Fortunately, my kids are aging out of that. I'm at the very top end of them caring about the Wiggles at this point. So I probably never have to hear them again. So that will be nice.
Oh, that is a fantastic. I can't wait for that. So we've got foster kids here and this and that. So we've got some younger kids. So it never seems to end. It's like a constant for me here. But when we look back on our history and whatnot and how we've gotten to where we are, sports typically plays a very important role in our development as a youth. So how did you get into sports? And what were some of those favorite players and teams that kind of shaped your life, your youth, so to speak?
So like most Canadians that are probably around my age, soccer really hadn't taken off yet. So very few people actually played soccer. So it was hockey in the winter, baseball in the summer, rinse and repeat for the next 15 years. Was essentially my experience before I quit hockey to play football and then quit baseball to play lacrosse. And then I just kept doing those till I stopped playing football when I was around 20, lacrosse around 22 or so. And then I just kind of play squash now.
Well, as long as you haven't quite progressed into the whole pickleball era. But I mean, as a kid, how many times were we on the outdoor rink as a Canadian scoring that Game 7 Stanley Cup winning goal? That was kind of like the dream back then, was it not? Like having that whole thought process and getting that big goal, hoisting the fake cup, doing instead of the air guitars, like the fake hoist. How many times did you do that?
No, millions. Everyone does that. I mean, for whatever sport it is that you care about. Because I remember when I was, what was it, 9, 8, maybe? That despite living on the opposite end of the country, I always loved the Canucks, mainly because of Pavel Bure, because he was just very exciting. And they ended up playing the Rangers in the Cup Finals. The first time I remember ever staying up super late was to watch the Game 7 of the '94 Finals when they lost to the Rangers, which was just devastating to me in my youth.
So I did a little bit of digging here there, Pat, and you've kind of got conflicting type universities in Canada to kind of work with. I mean, you went to St. Mary's University. You are the Husky, so to speak, as your alma mater. You also did some play-by-play announcing for the University of Toronto. Now, I remember during my recruiting process coming out of high school, the University of Toronto Varsity Blues were not a very good football team. I think at one point they had lost something like 43 straight games. So if the Huskies and the Varsity Blues are playing, which team are you cheering for?
No, I never went to the University of Toronto. So I ended up going to a private sports broadcasting college in Toronto, the College of Sports Media, after I finished up at St. Mary's. And as a part of what we did at the school was like, you got to not necessarily pick what sport that you wanted to do, but there was a play-by-play aspect of the curriculum. So a lot of people went and did junior A hockey somewhere in like Durham County as a part of the program. And I mean, I lived by the University of Toronto Stadium, the varsity stadium at Bloor and Young almost. It was right by the hell, now I can't even remember the subway station. I think it was the St. Andrews station. No, it wasn't St. Andrews station, whatever the hell it was. But it was very close for me to get to. And I was like, well, I'd rather do football than anything else. But the big thing was there was only, I think they had 4 home games throughout the course of the season, and they were not as god awful as they were during that giant losing streak. York was actually on like a 40-game losing streak at that point, the other Toronto University school. So I think that year they ended up going like 3-7 or something like that. They still weren't good by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to do football play-by-play. That was very close for me, so I linked on with them to do, and they were just kicking off streaming at that point. That was in 2010, 2011, around that time. So it felt like a very good way to see if I actually like doing play-by-play, which as it turns out, I don't. It's terrible.
Well, I never got to catch the play-by-play from the University of Toronto, but my first Pat Mayo experience was kind of the whole Sportsnet type era there. You were at Sportsnet for, I want to say 4 years, give or take, somewhere in that ballpark. So what was your introduction, though, to the sports media prior to maybe Sportsnet? How did you kind of come up with you know what, this is probably going to be what I want to get into? I know you went, I think it was a Bachelor of Science, I believe, at St. Mary's with a minor in history, and then you went to the College of Broadcasting. So where did you kind of decide that, hey, you know what, maybe this Bachelor of Science or history minor is not for me, and I want to do this broadcasting?
Yeah, I ended up doing a poli-sci major, which is useless at St. Mary's. And it took me like 6 years to get the undergrad because I kept switching my major. I started out in sciences, went to finance. I was like, reading and writing and not showing up to class sounds a whole lot easier. So I ended up switching to political science and just kind of drank my way through university. Shockingly enough, graduating in 2008, there were very few job prospects at the time. So I actually had a friend in Calgary who had just graduated with an engineering degree. He had caught on out there, bought a place, and doing great for like a 23-year-old. And he's like, yeah, I don't really know anyone out here. He's like, I know you need to get out of Dodge where you're at. Why don't you just come out and live with me? I was like, all right, I'll go do that, see if I can find work out there. And I didn't. But I did start writing a blog at the time about fantasy football and fantasy baseball. So I was able to build that up, get reps in every single day writing. I probably did that for about 8 months before I ended up catching on at Roto Community. And I started taking over their football writing there, their baseball writing there, the head of content. And then I ended up moving back after about 10 months. There was a minus 49 day in Calgary with the wind chill. And I said, this is not for me. I am not used to this cold. It does not get cold like that where I'm from. And that was enough for me. I moved back to Halifax. 4 months later, I moved to Toronto and ended up in broadcasting school. So everything kind of coalesced all at the same time of me getting all these reps in, writing, understanding what I wanted to do in the fantasy space. And then when you get into broadcasting school, it's not really about gambling or fantasy, but I knew that was going to be the lane that I wanted to go to. So it actually gave me a huge advantage while I was there. Everyone wanted to be a sideline reporter, host Sports Center, do whatever, the very generic sports media jobs that you can have. And I just decided to kick it out this way. I ended up at Sportsnet, got fired after 3 days from Hockey Central, ended up on the Row writing for the web, got fired from there after about 7 days. And then I hooked on with the magazine. Well, that was in existence. So I was an intern there, and then I got hired for freelance work for about 4 years.
So Tara, she's got that whole broadcasting thing. I'm used to those minus 51, minus 53 wind chill days. I'm about 2.5 hours south of Calgary, actually. So I'm very familiar with what you're talking about as far as that's concerned. Now, we just had the NFL Combine. It's come and gone. So if Pat Mayo could compete in the Combine, and we want to make you look good here too during this Combine, who are 2 or 3 people you're bringing with you to compete against in the Combine?
I did this when I went to Radio Row in 2019 in Minnesota. Worst place ever to go to Radio Row, by the way, because it was like minus 31 outside in February in Minneapolis. But I actually ran the 40 against my co-host, and I mean, even without a limb, I still think I could beat him in the 40-yard.
Which one was that there at the time?
That was Tim Andercust. We ran it in dress shoes, jeans, and like a jacket. He ended up running a 7.12. I think I ran a 5.19.
Oh, that's not even close.
Something like that. So I mean, I could flirt with maybe breaking 5 now. I'm in better shape now than I was then.
You smoked him. Wow.
Yeah, well, he's bad. Everyone smokes him.
Oh man. So Matt mentioned I was just like soaking in all of that because Pat, I graduated in 2009. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I could not get a job in 2009. So that's crazy. Can we talk about like your life and the progress that you've had through it? Is there a particular moment that changed the trajectory of your life? Did it happen in college or was it after that?
I'd probably say it was getting out of I went to St. Mary's because I'm from Halifax. It's in Halifax. I lived just off campus 1 year. That year was a disaster. A lot of fun. I would never go back and change that for the world. But it was a lot of like living at home, driving into college every single day, driving home. It's not the real college experience that a lot of people build up in their minds. And it perpetuates a state of arrested development. Like you just never really grow up because there's nothing really all that different from your life when you were 16 and then 22. It's just you can go and drink and do whatever the hell that you want, but you're still living at home. You're not really working full time. You're working part time just for spending money, that kind of thing. And Canadian college is much cheaper than American colleges, so it's not like you need to take on 6 figures of student debt in order to go to college to begin with. But when my friend gave me that out, just like getting out of where I was from and just changing what my lifestyle was, going to a new place, it changed everything for me. And I ended up moving back to Halifax now after I've had kids, but I was between Toronto and New York for about 12 years or so. And I wouldn't have been able to take that leap initially if I hadn't been able to move out to Calgary in a free spot with a friend in a spare bedroom just to change my scenery.
Talking about this journey that you've had, I feel like you offer a really unique perspective because you're in the fantasy industry and you touch like literally every single sport. When we're talking about your journey, like what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen now versus when you started?
Baseball doesn't matter anymore. Like at all.
No.
Like in terms of the fantasy space, like it's irrelevant. There are people that are always going to have their niche, right? And if it is baseball, you kind of need to be 24/7 baseball in order to have that edge. But the general public, like the death of fantasy baseball has been pretty, like when I got into it, fantasy football was clearly number 1. Fantasy baseball was a clear number 2 in the space. And that made a lot of sense for people who were writing. You would write football during football season, and then you bridge the gap between that and baseball. You start doing all your baseball prep in January while the playoffs were going on, because although I was doing betting because I was in Canada, most of my January was team previews for baseball. What's going on in spring training? What's happening during spring training, leading up to fantasy baseball drafts that goes all the way through until, let's say July 1st. And then after July 1st, when everyone gets back off vacation, then all of a sudden you're talking about football 2 times a week, baseball 3 times a week, writing those sorts of articles. It becomes 4-1 during August, and then it's 5-0, 6-0, whatever it might be. No one really pays attention to baseball during September, unless, you're talking about call-ups, that kind of thing, waiver wire type columns. But just season-long fantasy baseball, I don't know if it's completely dead, but it's pretty dead. And everyone you kind of see writing about it now is probably 50 plus.
Interesting. Very interesting. What Looking back at Mayo Media Network, when did you decide to start it, and what was the driving force behind that?
So I started Mayo Media Inc., the parent company, in 2017 when I left the Fantasy Sports Network to go take a contract with DraftKings as they became the title sponsor of my show. And as a part of my second contract with DraftKings, I decided that I wanted to own all my own content, which I probably could have gotten the first deal. Everyone hire a lawyer, hire an agent, and try not to do your own negotiations. It's a terrible idea. So actually being able to own all my IP, I needed a place to house that. But I could have been housing my own IP since 2017 and didn't. It wasn't until the football 2020 that I was able to start everything on Mayo Media Network. So just the ability to own all your own content in perpetuity, be able to sell ads off of that, just be able to own everything. The more you can own in this space, the better off you're going to be if this is something that you actually want to make a career out of. Like a lot of people, even today, are still working full-time jobs and then dabbling in fantasy because they really enjoy it. And you can make some good money that way. But if this is going to be a sustainable career for anyone, the more you can own, the better it's going to be for your long-term prospects.
Speaking of long-term prospects, I mean, Pat, as a Canadian myself and you, when you got into this whole industry, Sportsnet or whatnot, fantasy sports has never really, to me, it hasn't really felt like it's been that big north of the 49. I mean, especially out here west, I mean, there's not a whole lot of people that know a whole lot when it comes to the whole industry altogether. So when you broke in, who was that one person that you kind of looked up to kind of be like guide you through this whole process?
I was kind of doing it solo, but just trying to look at people. Like I was like, we are the first fantasy league that I played was on Yahoo, and Brad Evans was my guy. So every time you would go to the site, you'd click on it, there'd be a new Brad Evans column or whatever it might be. So I kind of tracked Brad's work for ages. And even Matthew Berry to an extent. I just didn't play a ton on ESPN, but everyone was familiar with Matthew Berry at the time as well. There's just very few people at the time actually writing about fantasy. It was maybe a career for like 10 people in the world. And you could see that fantasy football was becoming popular. But honestly, like I ended up working for free and having to work secondary jobs for about 3 years, even after I graduated, and basically working full time in the industry because there was no money to go around. It really wasn't until the advent of DFS and DraftKings, FanDuel, Draft Street, all those places coming in and actually spending money that there was an opportunity to not even really make great money at the time, but make enough to sustain yourself that you could do this and focus on this completely full time. So a lot of it, I mean, even today, I know that there's a lot of people still doing work for free, but has become a little bit better, I would say, in terms of people getting paid for the work that they're doing. Because before it would just be people would be offering up their services for free. At least now people are in a headspace where like, hey, if I'm going to do something, you are going to pay me something for it. And that's been one of the things that we've always done at Mayo Media Network. We've had interns over time. We still pay our interns, and we wanted to make sure that there were competitive rates for anyone who was involved with our network.
So if Mayo Media Inc. never really took off, and say you didn't really get into the whole broadcasting thing, you've accomplished a lot in your time already in that, but say this never happened, what would you be doing right now? Would you be putting that science major to work? Would you be using that minor in history? What would you be doing right now?
I'd probably have a government job where I was just checking the clock every day in order to get out of there.
Now, that does make sense. I mean, that's what a lot of people I think do. They just kind of let the time pass by until they find something they absolutely love. Now, Tara kind of alluded earlier to the whole fact that you covered a variety of sports. Like we got golf, we got football, we got baseball. I'm pretty sure you're going to be covering ice football here at some point. Apparently that's taking off on social media right now. By the way, I think that'd be a fantastic game altogether to be watching. But when you look at this, 24 plus Fantasy Sports Writer Association nominations, probably the most, I think, in the last decade or so belong to you. What do you kind of contribute to that success, basically, when it comes to covering that many sports? Not a lot of people can cover that wide variety of sports. A lot of people have that niche, can cover one sport. Like me personally, I dabble a little bit of hockey, a little bit of baseball, but I can't go into any depth about baseball. I can't go into depth about fantasy hockey. I got my fantasy football. So how do you cover everything? Like,
Well, in today's day and age, I don't. I had to give up a lot of things. And when I was doing this full time and working 90 hours a week, you were just on top of everything. That's just what was required for what I was doing, especially when I worked at the Fantasy Sports Network, like, and hosting shows and writing at the same time. That was all a necessity. Like, you have to know football. If you don't know football, you basically cannot have a job in the industry unless you are a major player in a very niche sport and everyone can come to you for that. So baseball, that was required at the time too. I gave up baseball once I started covering PGA full time. I had been covering PGA, but not to the extent that I do now. And it just became, I looked at the economics of the situation and said, well, is it better to be the 8th biggest baseball writer and the 3rd biggest golf writer in the space, and golf really hadn't taken off at that time? Or is it better to concentrate all my efforts to try to become the biggest PGA writer in 2015 that only covers fantasy or gambling, whatever it might be? And that just seemed like a better proposition for me. So if I do cover any other sport now, what I will do is, as a host of a show, I can figure out who the experts are in the space, learn enough about it just to prod them with questions and let them do the explaining. I'm never going to try to act like an expert in something that I'm not, and just try to keep it light on my end and let them go in depth with the analysis and then try to figure out the best strategies from there.
Did you integrate the DFS and the betting content immediately when it started to become prominent, or was there something that kind of kicked you to say this needs to be a major focal point?
So with DFS, yes, I kind of integrated it in 2014, 2015, just because people were getting money down on things on a weekly basis, and it's just logic dictated that if people are putting money into this, people might actually pay for information about this. Or if they are putting money into it, they're far more likely to go out and try to find content that will explain it to them, even if it's free, paid, whatever it might be. With betting, I've been doing betting content since 2009. It was always a thing that I've done because betting was not necessarily legal in Canada, but it was definitely not illegal in Canada, which it remains in most places in Canada right now. It's just sort of a gray market. You can use offshores, you can use European sites, essentially everywhere besides Ontario. I know different provinces are enacting new things right now, but where I've been, I've always had access to be able to bet on sports. So it was always just kind of a part of how I covered sports. So that part was really easy. That I've been doing gambling content way before gambling was actually legalized in America, which was a great boost for me the moment that it was legalized, because I didn't have to pretend like I knew anything about gambling off the hop and be like, oh yeah, well, this is what's going on. Like, I was already full steam ahead with that with 10 years of experience of doing content about it. So that was a big advantage for me the moment that the faucet turned on for money that way.
So you mentioned golf. It's kind of your thing now. I mean, that's your number one priority as far as content creation. But what's your first love?
Football is still number one.
Football's still number one. It's still the first love. That's always going to be.
It's not that it's the first love. It's just the most profitable thing I do. I've been doing it for 15 years. I'm never going to stop doing it. And it's the thing that people care the most about.
Yeah,
Which is more fun, football or golf, though?
Yeah,
golf's more fun. Golf's way more fun.
Yeah.
And I mentioned these awards that you've been nominated for and winning and stuff. What is that like when you're being recognized by your peers and to do it in multiple different categories? I mean, we talk about that where someone gets excited about just a simple nomination in one category, and that's what they've excelled at. But you've won awards in multiple categories that are being recognized by your peers. What kind of feeling is that for you?
Oh, it's nice, but it's like the same as anything. My career is not affected either way by whether I win, lose, or get nominations or anything like that. It's fun. Listen, it's always fun when you win anything. You could win a free fantasy football league and be like, yeah, I won. This is great. And you could lose one that just losing sucks. So there's always that part of it. There's the competitive part of it, but it's just nice to be recognized by people in your industry. But other than that, it's nothing really.
All right, now recognizing some people that you've worked with here, I'm thinking Cam Stewart, Tim Anderson there. Who do you like to rile up the most? Because I've seen both these guys go off on tangents. Cam Stewart can go. I really worry about him when he goes off on a tangent from time to time. Who do you enjoy kind of getting going a little bit more?
I actually enjoy getting Rob Pizzola has been coming on the show the last 3 years, and he is very even keeled and measured. So actually getting him riled up is a lot of fun because he loses it like once a year or so. Cam is in a perpetual state of losing it. So you don't really even need to rile him up. He comes prepackaged, riled up to anything that we're doing. That's just his personality. And most people I work with are in that vein. I've really cultivated a crew of co-hosts and guests over the years to kind of fit the style that I want to do. Like you see, like one of the things you said about the, the nominations and the recognition, that kind of thing. It's not that content is better or worse than anyone else's. Just my content's way different than everyone else's. A lot of people tend to do exactly the same thing over and over because they see one thing that's very successful, and then they just kind of tweak it 2 degrees and basically not necessarily have a blueprint for it, but it's very similar. Like when you tune into my show, it is not similar to basically any other content that you're going to get. Like there are people, and it's hurt in certain ways, the overall growth of our show, because some people just literally cannot tune into people being that mean to each other over and over. Like some people are just not wired that way. It makes them feel awkward. And I've talked to people about it, and there are some people that don't like that I yell at my co-hosts all that often, or they'll yell at me and we'll just make very personal attacks on one another. The whole concept behind it is like, we're all friends. We can do that to one another. And we're people who've known each other for a very long time. So we can get personal like that. But for some people, that's not their cup of tea. And if we wanted to be a bit more broad in that, we would tone that down. We wouldn't swear as much. We'd stay on topic more, but that's not what I want to do as a product.
Staying unique to yourself.
Yeah, but it does differentiate us from almost anyone. So when you see a piece of content that is unlike the other 50 pieces of content that you just saw, you're like, oh, well, this one's better because it's different. You're just bored of the other stuff.
I think it gives it that very bar-like type feeling where you get a bunch of buddies together, you're sitting down at the bar, you're talking sports. I mean, you're not going to have an analytics conversation. There's going to be some loud mentions of people's names and some maybe other words kind of thrown in there from time to time. Gets a little heated when you're sitting there talking about your favorite sports and what's going on. So, I mean, I think that's kind of where it separates. I think the average listener can really relate to it because they're probably doing the exact same thing at their local pub, depending on what the game is and whatnot, because people do get pretty passionate about certain subjects there.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. It is the more casual feel, but I mean, it's not devoid of analytics. I mean, the reason I was always nominated for baseball stuff and my baseball content hit so well was because I was one of the very first people in the fantasy baseball space who was constantly only writing and talking about analytics as a way to project players out. So having the mix of personalities and the mix of way that people approach things, I think ends up making it more relatable because we do have our quote unquote everymen on the show. Then we have people who are professional gamblers, professional DFS players, whatever it might be. Then you get that mix of people and you can let their personalities come through in their arguments.
So looking at the unique aspect of what you do with Mayo Media Network, what has that taught you about yourself personally?
That I really should have hired like a better assistant 8 years ago in order to do some of these things for me instead of like when you own your own business, you look at the profits, you look at the losses and you're like, wow, where can I invest in this company? And if you're, someone who likes to hoard their money like I do, you're like, well, I don't necessarily need someone to do all the scheduling for me. I can do all the scheduling. I don't necessarily need to hire someone to do ad sales. I can do all my ad sales. And I still do all these things. And I really shouldn't because it takes up way too much of my time. And it takes me away from the stuff that I really like doing. Like the way that people always kind of say, like, Pat has the best job in the world. He gets to talk sports. Like the part where I'm talking sports is the best job in the world. I do 8 hours of video, audio content a week for my show. I don't work 8 hours a week, but those 8 hours are amazing. Everything that surrounds it sucks. And it's a necessity with the part of the job if you're going to survive that you can't have these bloated expenses. So you need to know how to do a bit of everything. And maybe that's just kind of how I broke into the industry to begin with, that running a business was going to be exactly the same way that I used to run content, because until I hired my producer, Paul Shaughnessy, to do this with me in 2017 full time, we're a team of 2 in terms of editing, sound mixing, graphic design, all of that stuff. We split up those jobs and that's how we end up making our product. Prior to that, I was still just doing everything on the show. Like I would have my hand below the camera. I was switching the cameras as we were going along. I was putting in the graphics after the fact, after I built them. So just being able to be a jack of all trades and consistently deliver a high-end product, it does take away from your performance on camera or on mic, that there's just so many different things happening in your mind. When you have the freedom to sit there and just focus on being a performer, being an analyst, being a host, it does make the product a lot better. but there's not very many people who can just show up and only do one thing in today's day and age. And if you're going to put yourself into a position where this is going to be your career and you need to get noticed, you're not walking into $100,000 job where you get to talk about sports and that's the only thing that you do. You need to find a way to make yourself visible. And the only way that I was able to make myself visible in the first place was by doing every single job that related to audio and video production. Otherwise, I would have never been on video to begin with.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, jack of all trades here, master of none. I haven't quite figured out any of them to do good, but I can do a little bit of everything, just none of them good, like you can do. When you look back on this journey, I think we had some, maybe I'm wrong, I think something like I read 1,400 episodes is what you've already kind of produced for your show.
No, that's since my last podcast. I've switched like podcast hosting feeds. We are coming up on the 4,000th episode of the PME in May, I think.
So have you ever kind of gone back to episode 1 or episode 2 and like kind of graded yourself compared to where you are now? Because I mean, I've gone back and looked at some of these early podcasts that we've done here on this show, and it was bad at the beginning. I mean, it was really, really bad. Have you got a chance to go back and take a look and maybe see how far you've actually come to kind of appreciate the journey yourself?
Never go back and look at the crappy work that I used to do. It would make me feel bad.
Oh,
I won't even go back and watch an episode from last week because I will assume it's really terrible. So no, I will not. I mean, I edit all my own shows, so I get to see it in real time and splicing things together and making sure that stuff is covered properly and inserting graphics. So I live with that show for the amount of time that it takes me to do a show, and then I'm on to the next show, onto the next show, onto the next show. I never really look back at any of this stuff.
Wow. Okay.
Hey, I don't blame you, man. I've listened to myself, and I'll probably go back to listen to this show and be like, dude, I sound like an idiot. And then that's pretty much how I do it every time I do the editing after every show. So, I mean, I get that. So the question then, I'm going to push it over to Tara here. Tara, this is one of our favorite questions we ask each and every week because I think it has so much meaning behind it.
Relationships. We've talked about a few people, but relationships obviously are very important. What are, give us 1 or 2 people who you respect that helped you along the way.
I mean, when I first started dating my now wife in 2014, it really did change. Like I was going to flame out pretty quickly. I was, rising in the industry. That can give you a big head from time to time. Once you actually start getting a little bit of notoriety, people start recognizing your work. You start getting paid a little bit more for what you're doing. And I was working between 75 and 90 hours a week, every single week throughout the course of the past 2 years. And when I met her, she's like, you need to calm down. And like, you're going to absolutely blow this. And if I hadn't got off the lifestyle that I was living at the time, I probably wouldn't be doing this anymore. I would be, I don't know what I would be doing at this point, but I wouldn't say I was necessarily going down a dark road, but just putting 100% of everything you do into your job is just not healthy. So, getting together with her and then, easing back a little bit, working far more efficiently on what I want to do. Like she really taught me that and helped me really stay grounded in that. And I think that's translated into my content. I think I'm better at content because of it. And I'm more efficient and pickier with my content too. I'm not just going to be on for 4 hours a day. I'd rather put out 1 good hour than just feel the need to be out there for 4 hours just to do it. So I think she taught me a lot of it in that respect, in terms of a relationship in my life that really changed what I did for the better in my professional life.
Nothing humbles you more than your spouse or your child. I mean, if you want full out honesty, ask your child what they think about what you're doing right now. I mean, they'll let you know pretty quick, and it'll be unrated type of advice coming from them. Speaking of advice or maybe negative feedback or whatever you want to call it, there's internet trolls out there all the time, and especially when you get to a certain level there, Pat. I mean, I'm sure you've had your handful of interactions over the years. Has there ever been kind of a back and forth where you're like, you know what, I kind of enjoy this going back and forth a little bit, or you're kind of like, hey, you know what, that was pretty good. I mean, for me, my mustache usually brings a lot of attention, and there's been some pretty interesting comments regarding my mustache from our peers there on the internet. But is there a back and forth kind of conversation that kind of either made you chuckle or one that you particularly remember?
No, not really. I do remember someone writing 5,000 words about how they were going to break into my house and murder me in my sleep, and they sent me an email about it. That was fun. Terrifying stuff of vivid detail about how they were going to skin me alive while I was asleep. So that was, I guess I gave them a bad start sit answer one time on the internet. But I don't engage with any of this stuff. If someone says something I do not like or just respond to negatively on the internet, mute, just never look at it again.
It's amazing how easy that mute button actually works, that people don't use it nearly enough. I mean, we talk about mental health and this and that quite a bit in our everyday lives. That's a pretty quick way to kind of help that whole process out. Isn't it? Just kind of hit that mute button and forget all about it altogether?
Yeah, because I started probably doing it like 7-8 years ago. So you used to get, I mean, when you open yourself up to like, hey, anyone got start sit questions? And like, let's say for fantasy football season. And it's funny because the people who will not necessarily even just troll you, just be the most negative, the meanest on the internet are the people playing for like the lowest stakes, which always just blows my mind. The people who play for the highest stakes understand that all of this stuff is their decision when it comes down to it. It's the other people who just really seem to take it personally. But you start muting like 5 or 6 people, and then you notice that it was probably just the same 5 or 6 people who were doing it all the time anyway. It's not the majority of people. It's a very small minority of people who are just complete assholes on the internet, and you mute them, you never see it again, and you never have to deal with it again. It's perfect.
Now, I know you don't necessarily mute Tim at all on the show, but I know there's a lot of back and forth banter there from every show. I mean, that goes back to your friendship way back when it all kind of started. How has Tim prepared you for parenthood along the way? I mean, I'm just going to throw that question out there. Has he kind of changed your thought process along the way? You're like, you know what? I'm already dealing with Tim. I'm going to deal with my child another way altogether.
I mean, I'm able to. So all the worst parts of my personality come out on the show. That's what makes it, I think, somewhat of a compelling program, that I get to be the asshole that I used to be in real life. And I can channel it to that 1 hour of the show and then just like feel fine. The rest, it's almost therapeutic in that way, that I can get out all my negative emotions onto Tim. He's sort of like Butters in that episode of South Park where he had to take all of the trolling for everyone in the world. But he's able to do it. Like he relishes in that kind of thing. And people troll him nonstop. He just does not care whatsoever. He's like, I do this for fun. That's all it is for me. But for kids, the one thing that Tim really did prep me for is the weird stuff that kids come up to eat with, because Tim still eats like a 3-year-old. My 3-year-old eats like Tim. So it's really prepared me very well that way.
Well, I was going to ask you this right now because Easter is approaching, and I need to know how many Peep sandwiches are too many for children to be consuming.
It's funny because my wife loves Peeps as well. I don't understand it. But it's funny. You mentioned like Easter, Christmas, all these things. I don't think I've celebrated one of these. Like Christmas, I'll spend Christmas Day with the kids when they open presents, but usually Christmas is a work day. Usually Easter is a work. Like Easter is generally like Master's Weekend. Like that's just full on everything. Like New Year's Day, I tend to take off because I don't cover college sports. But when the NFL coincides with it, then I got to work that day. That holidays are just kind of out the window for me.
And let's wrap things up with one more piece of advice. And piece of advice for those trying to make it in the sports industry. Maybe something focused on people that are wanting to make it, like generating their own site or their own YouTube channel, trying to get into the industry and progress that way.
The first thing you got to do is actually do it. And you can think about doing it all you want, but until you start doing it and then start learning from what you have done, then you can actually start to think about what's actually next in doing this potentially as a career or generating income off of it. I think a lot of people get boiled down, especially in the fantasy football industry, about how things have been done for so long. Have your own website, have your own YouTube channel, start a podcast. That's great, but everyone's done that now for 15 years. To make yourself different from those people is going to be incredibly difficult. So try to find something that people aren't talking about, even if it is in terms of football. What's a different, unique angle you can take? And I would look at, where are the eyeballs right now? Like I'm not good at short form to begin with. That's why I have super long shows every single day. But between Instagram Reels, Facebook Reels, TikTok, like try to find a way to do 10 to 30 second videos trying to articulate what you want. And I think that's a much better path right now for someone trying to break into the industry, because that's where not only more eyeballs are going to go there right now versus starting a podcast where you might have like 20 people listening for 8 straight years. And there's no growth potential with anything with that front, because just trying to market your podcast costs a ton of money. I lucked out that I started mine 15 years ago when there was none, so I just have a lot of legacy subscribers on mine. And podcasts work like a lot of things, where the more subscribers you have, the easier it is to get more subscribers because you end up becoming more visible. It doesn't really work that way. I mean, yes, it does work that way with Instagram and TikTok. By having a huge following, you will become more visible, but the potential to not necessarily go viral, but to have your videos seen by a lot of people, then you can tie it in with affiliate fees and selling things off that front. And the production costs and time is way down on that as well. Where if it takes me 5 hours to do a 1 hour show, after all the video processing, the filming, the setting everything up, the audio mixing, you can probably bang out like 50 TikToks in that time and pick your favorite 3 ones to throw up. Maybe one of them will catch fire, and all of a sudden you've just created a 30-second video that has more views than 2 months of my podcast. If you have something to sell in that, be it an affiliate fee for an Underdog or a site that you're repping or a product that you're repping, you can just generate a ton of revenue that way. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing right now.
Well, we know a lot of people right now are using Underdog. I mean, that's kind of one of those big ones that has taken over everything as far as fantasy is concerned, with the prop betting and stuff. I mean, what we've seen here is prop bets and betting is now kind of surpassed even fantasy football, so to speak, as far as where the most eyes happen to be. So I'm kind of glad you put that out there. But right now, Pat, you're getting busy. Like, this is starting to be your busy type of the season. Lots of eyes are going to be heading your way. We've got the Players Championship, I think, March 12th starting there. We've got the Masters coming in April 8th, give or take. The NFL Draft is coming. So you've got a lot of content coming out here over the next little while. Just kind of let everyone know what's next for Pat.
Well, I just signed with Underdog Fantasy as of March 1st. So I have left DraftKings. I've gone to Underdog because of a lot of things that you've said, like the entries for fantasy player props is a lot of fun. Doing the best ball drafts is a ton of fun, and I'm looking forward to really getting integrated with that into my content, along with all of the other things that I do. But yeah, all the 4 golf majors, NFL Draft, March Madness, we have all of that coming up. And then, there's still football every single week on the show because football never really goes away. So you can catch all of that on the Pat Mayo Experience, Mayo Media YouTube, Pat Mayo Experience Audio. I write a free newsletter that has 25,000 subs now, that if you go to Substack, search Mayo Media, you can find that. It has bets, it has information, it has giveaways, everything like that. So trying to, again, own as many things as possible, along with, like, if you're into golf, fantasynational.com is a place that you'll probably want to go to do your research, to generate your lineups, to make your bets. I own runthesims.com with Justin Freeman, where if you're into football and you want to be able to run easy simulations on player props, on DFS lineups, that's the spot. We also have F1 tools. We're going to have MMA tools coming very soon as well. So just having all these different things, you can never really expect any one person to sign up for everything that you do, but being able to cast a wider net with different products that are related to you that might interest one person here but not over here is a great way to bring more people into your orbit. So again, it kind of goes back to the more you can own, the better, and the more you can do in that way, the better. That you don't necessarily need to have the person who subscribes to the newsletter as a member at Run the Sims or a downloader of the podcast, but they're still in your orbit that you can reach whenever you want to. I think that's very important.
Well, Pat, we got a lot out of this show this week. I mean, it's fantastic. Just kind of learn everything that you've been doing. I think the biggest thing we got here is own your own content. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, if you're putting it out there, own it and try and get as much of that back as you possibly can. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy putting that hat on to do everything, but I think you've done it better than anybody else. If there is a guideline out there, a template on how to do it, I think people should be looking at you and how you've done it over the years, and I think you've done it the right way. It's been fantastic to see what this whole Mayo Network Incorporated has turned into over the last few years, and the people that you've kind of rubbed elbows with and brought along on this network as well. So definitely, personally, I enjoy every little bit of it. I love listening to Cam Stewart getting going there. I know Jake Seeley speaks very highly of you as well. So lots of people view you very highly in this industry, Pat, and I just want to thank you again for your time this week. And with that being said, head over to the Mayo Media Network. Check out everything they've got going on there. For Tara Roberts, I'm Matt Donnelly, and this has been Behind the Grind. We'll see you next time.